back to their causes by many people. Even when the bad consequences follow closely after a given policy, many people may not connect the dots. And advocates of policies that backfire often attribute these bad consequences to something else. Sometimes they claim that the bad situation would have been even worse if it had not been for the wonderful policies they advocated. There are many reasons why fallacies have staying power, even in the face of hard evidence against them. Elected officials, for example, cannot readily admit that some policy or program that they advocated, perhaps with great fanfare, has turned out badly, without risking their whole careers. Similarly for leaders of various causes and movements. Even intellectuals or academics with tenure stand to lose prestige and suffer embarrassment when their notions turn out to be counterproductive. Others, who think of themselves as supporters of things that will help the less fortunate, would find it painful to confront evidence that they have in fact made the less fortunate worse off than before. In other words, evidence is too dangerous, politically, financially, and psychologically, for some people to allow it to become a threat to their interests or to their own sense of themselves. No one likes to admit being wrong. However, in many kinds of endeavors, the costs of not admitting to being wrong are too high to ignore. These costs force people to face reality, however painful that might be. A student who misunderstands mathematics has little choice but to correct that misunderstanding before the next examination. And someone in business cannot continue losing money indefinitely by persisting in mistaken beliefs about the market or about the way to run a business. In short, there are practical as well as intellectual imperatives to see through fallacies. The difference between sound and fallacious economic policies by a government can affect the standard of living of millions. This is what makes the study of economics important, and the exposure of fallacies more than an intellectual exercise. There are far too many fallacies to list them all. However, we can sketch 4 widespread kinds of economic fallacies here, and investigate more specific fallacies in detail in the chapters that follow. These 4 widespread kinds of fallacies may be called the zero-sum fallacy, the fallacy of composition, the chess pieces fallacy, and the open-ended fallacy. The zero-sum fallacy. Many individual fallacies in economics are founded on the larger and usually implicit fallacious assumption that economic transactions are a zero-sum process, in which what is gained by someone is lost by someone else. But voluntary economic transactions, whether between employer and employee, tenant and landlord, or international trade, would not continue to take place unless both parties were better off making these transactions than not making them. Obvious as this may seem, its implications are not always obvious to those who advocate policies to help one party to these transactions. Let us start at square one. Why do economic transactions take place at all, and what determines the terms of those transactions? The potential for mutual benefit is necessary but not sufficient unless the transaction's terms are in fact mutually acceptable. Each side may of course prefer terms that are especially favorable to themselves, but they will accept other terms rather than lose the benefits of making the transaction altogether. There may be many terms acceptable to one side or the other, but the only way transactions can take place is if these sets of terms acceptable to each side overlap. Suppose that a government policy is imposed in the interest of helping one side, say employees or tenants. Such a policy means that there are now 3 different parties involved in these transactions, and only those particular terms which are simultaneously acceptable to all 3 parties are legally permitted. In other words, these new terms preclude some